This is an introduction to Shipton Sollars, the little church at Shipton Sollars, St Mary. There are actually two villages called Shipton, and they're very close together. One is called Shipton Sollars and one is called Shipton Olive. To reach the Shiptons, you turn off the A40 at the junction between the Oxford and Gloucester Road, and to one way is the Frog Mill and Gloucester, but to the other way is the Shiptons. You go down the hill and you come to a stream which actually goes into the River Colne. You cross that, and a little way up the other side you come to Shipton Olive, the village. On the right there is a church, quite a small church close to the road, with a very striking double bell cote. But on the way down the hill you may not have seen the church sitting up on the bank above you. So that's it. There's the picture. There are steps up. There's then a steep path, and you arrive at the north door. We're actually looking at the south side. It's in quite a big square churchyard, and the door is always open. It's never locked, so you push open the north door and you walk in and you see a very simple two-cell church. Next picture. There it is. You're inside. It's a plain, very uncluttered nave and a small chancel beyond. Above there is a very interesting timber roof. It's 15th century basically, although of course there's been timbers renewed there. And the clear glass in the west window, which we shall look at again in a minute, fills the church with light. It does too if you open the south door. Now the north door was blocked up. The south door is an old door. And when both the doors are open, it's an extremely light, cheerful church. Picture 3. What you see when you get into the church is largely the result of the restoration in 1929. This was a big restoration. It was carried out by the owner of Shipton Sollars Manor, which is very close, just a little way down the road, across the other side of the churchyard, really. And his name was Ernest Francis Fieldhouse. And his father bought the manor, and he was the patron of the living, and he wanted to restore the church in memory of his parents. So he set about appointing an architect called William Elbert Ellery Anderson, who was a Cheltenham ecclesiastical architect and who was a member of SPAB and who was very keen to restore the church to something probably quite close to how it was when it was first built. So the pulpit, for example, is a nice example of the restoration, because it was covered in blue paint. And one of the things they did was to strip the pulpit and obviously restore the Jacobean wood. By the side of it, there is an hourglass, which I find amusing because the squire obviously didn't want his sermons to go on for too long. But actually that one is a modern replacement, and the old hourglass was beside the pulpit in 1870, when the church was effectively in a very poor state of repair. But quite recently it was stolen, but fortunately it has been replaced with a substitute. So Anderson wanted to purify the church, and one of the things he did, apart from stripping the pulpit, was to strip off 16 layers of whitewash from the walls, which meant he discovered some wall paintings just a bit here and there. And if we look at the next picture, he they discovered underneath the whitewash a lot of consecration crosses. They're dark ochre paint, and they found some more later. There are, I think, altogether 7. One of the rather nice touches, I think, is that he put candle lights, iron brackets underneath each one so they can be lit. So the church was possibly consecrated when it became a parish church, and I shall talk about that again in a minute. Well, you can see in the center of the picture there is a stone altar, a mensa, and there was enormous excitement when Anderson was doing the restoration, because they discovered this stone slab underneath the chancel floor. And he applied to the local bishop and the church and said he wanted to restore the altar, the stone altar, which was an early one, to the church. But the Church of England didn't like that idea at all. It thought a wooden altar was a much more suitable Puritan type of thing to have in the church. And they said no, but he persevered. And he showed that the space at the back where it would have fitted exactly was clear of plaster. So that's where it went. He discovered the support for the base. He discovered one of the supports that props it up. And most significant, he discovered a consecration cross on the stone altar. And so they gave in and they agreed that it could be restored. It is usually, it has to be admitted, covered with an altar cloth. But if you quietly lift the corner, you can see the stone mensa. Can we see the next picture, please? Now, this is the chancel, and we're looking now to the south side. It's quite small. There's a 13th century piscina on the wall in front of you on the left. And I think that's significant because probably the church existed, or a building called a chapel existed, as early as 1236. But it didn't become a parish church, which was a formal thing, a legal thing, until a bit later in the century. And so I think some of these features are recognitions of its parish status. And William de Sollars became the lord of the manor about 1285. But the parish status had been established before that. But anyway, the name Sollars comes from his surname. So in the background, you can see a very small lancet window of that date. You can also see some modern stained glass, which is part of the restoration. And they contain, the two sides of the window contain a rebus on the left for field house, with a house and a field, and on the right, a ship, which is for Shipton. But of course, Shipton actually was a place where sheep were kept, and it was named from the sheep farm. Can we see the next picture, please? Looking from the chancel into the nave again, you can see some consecration crosses at the back. You can see the clear window that I referred to. You can also see at the bottom of the picture that there is a step up from the chancel to the nave. And this is very unusual because usually the chancel is higher than the nave. But in actual fact, because the churchyard was unconsecrated, all the burials that were done locally were done under the nave floor. And this raised the level of the floor. And in 1850 something, 1856, it was closed for burials. They said there was no more room. But in 1870, when the church was really falling down, the floor of the nave was collapsing into the vaults underneath where people were buried. At the back, in the center there is a font, but it's not in fact the original font. When the church was closed, I'm afraid they took the font down to Shipton Olive, and so this is a replacement. Can we have the next window, please? Next picture, I'm sorry. Well, while they were doing this restoration and organizing tremendous work around the outside walls, I think this is the date when they closed the priest's door. It's also the date when they opened the north door, because the north door had been closed and parishioners had to walk round the church and come in at the south door. And it was very common for the north door to be closed and for the south door to be the operative door. I suppose it made the church warmer, and they were no longer going in for processions to march round the church. So amongst the debris in the walls, they found this cross, a patty cross, which is the arms of the cross are splayed out, and it's probably 13th, 14th century. And so they put it up on the back, on the top of the chancel, East End. Next picture, please. When they scraped the walls, they did leave quite a lot of interesting memorials. And this is a memorial by the north door, which of course is a modern door because the north door had been blocked up. It's a memorial to John Powell and his family of the Frog Mill. Now then, I did mention right at the beginning that when you turned off the A40, the turning that went to Gloucester went to the Frog Mill. It's a very big public house. Well, today it's been much enlarged and improved, but it's always been an important inn, a coaching inn, because of where it stood on the Gloucester Road. And tenants of the mill were important in Shipton Sollars because the Frog Mill was in Shipton Sollars. And so quite a lot of them actually are buried in the church. The owner of the Frog Mill, of course, was the owner of the manor, Shipton Sollars Manor. So there are floor slabs for the publican of the Frog Mill as well, and this very elaborate one on the wall. The Frog Mill contains a bit of a name, Frog, and nearby was the Frog Marsh. And one of the questions about Shipton Sollars is, well, was the village once bigger? And it's often said that where there aren't many people living round the church anymore, it was a deserted medieval village. Well, in this case, in Shipton, they weren't actually living near the church because it's a little distance away. But there was a little village. There are settlement humps and bumps in the Frog Marsh. It was mentioned by name in the 14th century with people living there, but it has gone. And so one of the big problems of these churches, of course, is that the people no longer live close to it. They live in Shipton, rather closer to Shipton Olive, which is only half a mile down the road. Can we see the next picture, please? And this is the south door. Now, this is actually an old door, repaired, but an old door. And you can see there are several interesting memorials on the wall. And there's rather a touching poem on one of them, which is to a lady who died in childbirth. And the poem has been set out in the Church's Conservation Trust guide to the church, to Shipton Sollars. So the church has been looked after off and on all its life. It's not been enlarged very much, but it's been preserved and repaired on several occasions, and there are some very interesting things in it. And it has a very peaceful atmosphere which people locally appreciate. So there's much to be learned about the church church's history, but also the history of the Shiptons from this church.